Hello. I'm going to take a minute to go over some functionality added to the Vicinity 4.92, which is the March 2023 release. Specifically, we're talking about cost roll-up for companies that use intermediates in their formula. We have a number of clients that will make a base or certain different intermediates and maybe store them and then use them in another formula, or maybe they don't store them. Maybe that's the easiest way to manage the master formula is at that level. So when they go to make a batch, they may go and make that intermediate or intermediates and then put it into the final batch. That's kind of the scenario we're talking about. And this also is true in like breweries, for example, where where they've got to brew fermentation and packaging, that type of scenario. So it happens in a lot of different industries, and kind of want to go through something that we've added based on some requirement from the user base. I'm going to bring up an item that I have in my demo environment, just kind of talk to you about the data, and then I'll show you the actual functionality we added. So I've just pulled up an item. It actually is made up of, it's pretty simple. It's actually a fill formula, really. It's got an intermediate, and it's also got some packaging, but it could also have other ingredients here as well at the parent level, so to speak. And so to get an actual cost, you would need the cost of that packaging, and this intermediate. Well, as those that use intermediates know, these raw material costs could be changing at any time, and therefore it would affect the new cost of this intermediate. And so the use case was, if I'm wanting to work at a formula level, let's say this packaging formula, and I've got one or more intermediates, I need the ability for the system to go and automatically recalculate those intermediates with some reasonable cost, a current cost, a proposed cost, something like that. That's what we're talking about here. And currently in Vicinity, under the previous release, it would just go and look at the intermediate cost that it had stored at the intermediate cost level. In other words, it would go to look at the inventory value or the Vicinity value, depending on where you're getting your sources from, and it would just use that static cost. And you would have to do a cost roll-up, updating the intermediate before you'd see the appropriate cost on formula entry. Of course, that caused problems for a lot of our formulators, folks that do a lot of different recipes or formulas in their process. I'm going to go ahead and bring up a real example now. So DC VMRed. So I've got a formula out here, and the actual raw materials to make the intermediate is this. And I'm just going to change this over to be the formula type, and we're going to move it over to the fill. Now you're seeing this intermediate. This is the same structure that we saw over on the bill of material inquiry screen. So under this is actually a number of raw materials associated with it. I currently have my system configured to go look at my Dynamics inventory, and evidently I've never made this item and put it on hand. So it actually has a zero cost right now, but it doesn't actually cost zero to make this product. And this is where the problem was, is that clients would have to roll up the cost for this item to get the cost just so they could see it on a formula. And that's, of course, multiple steps that aren't necessary. So what we added in this release is we added this button under the ingredient costs. So in the previous release, you could pick which source of the raw material costs you had, and also some sub choices if you had, like under Dynamics, it could be standard or current, of course, proposed cost and Vicinity cost. This button is the new one. And when I click it, it will actually go and get all of the raw material costs for that intermediate and roll up those costs accordingly. Now, this actually could be a real time saver for those folks that are doing kind of experimental formulas or wanting to do trials and things like that. So know that this can stay persisted, saved with the screen. So for example, if I close the screen right now, I'll just go ahead and save that. If I close the screen and reopen it, that setting that we just had for the intermediate cost rollup is actually already there. So If you leave this checked on, every formula that you look up in formula entry will go through this process. If you have a lot of intermediates, you might want to turn this off unless you need that cost updated. It's just so that it doesn't have to go through and do all that calculation only for you to be looking at a formula. Now, two things I want to point out. One is this cost that just got calculated is in memory. We're not writing it anywhere at this point. We haven't gone through a process of saying, update these costs, etc. Certainly some feedback from our user base will help us determine how much further we go with this, but right now it's basically a view on this particular screen. But this cost can also make its way over to a formula report. So if you had a format of a formula you're working on, you could set up a report and print it like a cost analysis of a formula, for example, that you might send to a customer or prospective customer. That cost that's in memory can be passed into this report as well. We also are looking at ways to get an expanded bill of material, an expanded cost roll-up where you'd see all those levels. That's not there yet. This functionality is basically just to see it on the screen and also pass it to this report we're talking about. We'd love to get your feedback on it because it's something we're really interested in driving further. Now, I did want to point out something that you need to be watching for and taking a look at, and that has to do with additional costs. So as you add additional costs to a formula, just here, see if I've got one. So when you add an additional cost to a formula, especially if that additional cost is a fixed cost, so I'll just pick up one here and say the time is we're going to add, say, 25 units. Fixed. In other words, it's not variable. What you've got to make sure that you're providing is the standard batch size, because we need to take this fixed dollar amount and allocate it across however many items you think you might get out of this formula run. It only affects us on fixed costs being applied at a variable basis. In other words, $25 units, 2,500, whatever that math ends up coming out to be, needs to be spread out per pound, per gallon, whatever. So keep an eye on that. If you use additional costs, I would suggest before you start relying on this value that's being calculated, make sure to go and run a component cost roll-up and make sure you're comfortable with what you're doing as it relates to setting up a default batch size. That is how we allocate those fixed costs across, say, per pound or per gallon. Otherwise, from a functionality perspective, you've got that dialed in. If you're using cost roll-up today and you're comfortable with that and you're just trying to get that on this screen, this is perfect for you. If you think you want to use this, I would suggest you make sure you're comfortable with the cost roll-up report first, because you can see all those details. And once you're feeling comfortable about that, then use this screen, and I think it would really help a number of companies out. So feel free to give us some feedback. We'd love to see where you take this and what direction you might want to see this go. We really appreciate the feedback and hope this helps you in the future. Thanks a lot and have a great day.